Welcome to Between Two Psychs, a podcast where two psychologists and Board Approved Supervisors deep dive into many of the questions and challenges that provisional psychologists and early career therapists face in everyday practice, during training, throughout the internship, and beyond as they progress into working more independently. Your hosts Isabel Tombleson and Claire Trevitt talk about a range of topics specifically relating to psychologists and therapists who are just starting out.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, Isabel.
Okay, we are going to talk about difficulties in the workplace. This follows our episode where we talked about difficulties in supervision, but there are some different challenges of being on placement or being employed in workplaces where we are provisionally registered or we're new and emerging therapists. So we want to touch on those because, again, this is an important topic for helping us to get through those early years in a safe and beneficial way.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want your workplace during your internship years or your study years and throughout your early career time, through as you develop, we want it all to be safe and sustainable for you. So really what we wanted to talk about is when you're in a placement or an organisation where it doesn't feel that way. And what?
That's right. So there are a few areas that we will touch on. So we're going to talk about certain employment conditions and some things to be wary of. Billing, NDIS payments, Medicare, being a casual, being a contractor, those sorts of payment-related issues, client-related issues, but in particular, contracts or when you've got an employer telling you you're not allowed to take clients with you when you finish or when you leave. So we're going to talk about those situations. We're going to talk a little bit about where you can access support and advice and the bodies that exist in Australia that you can go to get assistance, managerial issues, negotiating on tasks beyond being a therapist. And we'll touch on briefly having challenging or difficult conversations in those situations if it's safe to do. And a little bit of work health safety might come up here as well.
Yes, so we've got quite a bit to get through.
We do. So let's first talk about the employment setting. There are various types of employment settings where we can be employed provisionally or as new therapists. We've got contractor roles, very popular now. We've got being employed while we're undertaking training. That's really common, especially for everyone who's a lot of people doing 4+2 traineeships, which is the older program now that's being phased out. There are a lot of situations, so a lot of problems can come up with these types of employment conditions. But what are some of the things that you're really aware of, Claire?
The first thing is that provisional psychologists are not able to work as contractors. So any role that would require them to have an ABN would not be suitable because it really means that they then be working independently. And as a provisional psychologist, they need to be working under supervision. So that's the first thing. And I would say that a lot of organisations may not be aware of this. So they may be offering a contractor arrangement. And I've actually started working with a number of provisional psychs who are. And then when we've discussed that, it's been changed to an employee arrangement. So it's really about just making sure that you're aware of that. And it's really about making sure that you have support. The other thing is working as a casual I think working as a casual in any setting is different to working as a contractor. So working as a casual means that you're working on a casual basis for the hours that you work. So if you're seeing 4 clients and then after those sessions that you're completing case notes or you're writing letters or you're speaking to people, if you're employed as a casual, then you need to be paid for those hours. Whereas if you're employed as a contractor, which means that you may get a percentage of the fee that each client attracts. Often there's a percentage of about 60, sometimes 70%, but I think 60 seems to be the industry standard. Factored into that fee is usually the admin time. So that's when you do get paid per client work per client seen, as opposed to, start that again. So that's when you do get paid per client that you've seen, as opposed to the actual work that you've undertaken, because normally that is a higher hourly rate. And if it's not, thinking about that because it does need to be sustainable.
And this would apply across various types of workplace settings, private practice, probably non-government settings as well, probably not so much in like government health, for example. Usually if you've got a job with them, that's usually an employee arrangement. But certainly in non-government sector for sure.
Yeah, especially private practice where they're not employing contractors, but where they do have psychologists or other therapists on a contract arrangement. It does need to be different for provisional psychologists. But of course, you can be on an arrangement.
I think it's really common for most of us, maybe in private practice, to be on a contract and be responsible for paying our own tax and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who would you go to for advice on that, Claire? Naturally, you could talk to a supervisor, talk to your primary supervisor, but is there any other places that people can go to ask for advice on these things?
I think that Fair Work Australia, they wouldn't help you with the contract aspect as a provisional psych because they're more interested in whether the conditions are fair, but it's just AHPRA wouldn't like you to be working as a contractor. But in terms of if you're under an arrangement whereby you're not being paid for the hours that you're working, and I do believe that there's a minimum number of hours you can work as a casual as well, that would be Fair Work Australia. And sometimes this happens where people are leaving employment, and then of course the employer says, oh, I need you to finish up various things and you're leaving because it's not a sustainable workplace. And so you've got all of this admin piling up, and then the employer is insisting on all of that being tied up before you leave. And then of course you put a timesheet in and they don't want to pay it. So that might be a case where you might take that to Fair Work Australia, whereby you could show the hours that you've worked and what was paid or not paid.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a difference. So maybe seek advice from your supervisor if you're unsure if your paid employment arrangement is appropriate and ethical.
Absolutely.
And approved by the board. Yeah.
Yes, because I think this is where it gets into whether it's ethical in terms of our code of ethics, because we do need to be completing case notes and those sorts of things, but also whether it's legal in terms of a workplace setting.
Okay. The other area that we wanted to talk about is just sometimes it can get really tricky with billing. So for example, you're a provisional psychologist in a private practice, you're doing a placement, and I don't actually know this. Do clients still pay when they see a provisional psychologist in a private practice? I'm guessing they are, but there's no Medicare. You can't get Medicare rebated for seeing a provisional psychologist.
No, usually it's a reduced fee, and often it's a gap. It's like the same as the gap fee. So, for example, if there's a $100 gap fee after the Medicare rebate, the provisional psychologist might be billed at $100 for the session, something like that. So no, provisional psychologists are not able to, or attract any kind of sessions with a provisional psychologist are not able to attract a Medicare rebate. And also with NDIS, provisional psychologists can provide services under NDIS, but it needs to be under the counsellor rate, I believe. Mm-hmm. And what's quite interesting about the NDIS is the wording, because they use practitioners under supervision who are supervised. And what they mean by that in NDIS language is that the supervisor's in the room. If you are being supervised, i.e. your supervisor is in the room, then yes, the full fee can apply, but of course only once, and there are two practitioners in the room. What NDIS refer to as unsupervised is the supervisor not being in the room. And of course, that's quite confusing, because when you're a provisional psych and a supervisor of a provisional psych, it's drilled into us that under supervision means receiving supervision. And so a provisional psych would not be working unsupervised. It's a different way of describing supervision, and that can lead to a lot of confusion. And so if you are a provisional psychologist working under NDIS, you need to be billed under the counsellor rate and not under the psychologist rate, which is the rate for fully registered practitioners.
And then that would be an ethical issue, because clients could be potentially getting overcharged if you're a provisional psychologist seeing them under NDIS. We don't want that happening.
No, exactly. And sometimes people are just not aware of this because the language is quite confusing. So,
and just experience as well. Like I'm imagining NDIS was before my time when I was a prov psych, but I wouldn't have had a clue. Like whatever the practice manager or something would tell me, I would probably just go, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And I could imagine that would happen still.
Exactly. It's like in work cover. I know that in New South Wales, you can't provide counselling under work cover. I'm not sure what it's like in different states. Different states sometimes have different arrangements.
Mm.
And also, whether it's called psychological counselling or vocational counselling, I think a provisional psychologist can provide. So sometimes it can feel quite confusing around the services that provisional psychs are actually allowed to provide, and also will depend very much on the service that's paying. So there may be an EAP service, for example, who may be happy to pay provisional psychs. And there may be another EAP service that isn't. So sometimes it's really worth checking because it could be quite different in terms of the billing arrangements.
Yeah.
So it can be tricky in private practice for provisional psychologists, and often it's relying on private pay under that reduced fee.
Yeah, yeah. This sort of falls into difficulties in arranging our work roles and what we do and billing. All of this falls under like employment arrangements and some difficulties that come under that. There are a few other things that I was thinking about sharing that kind of fall into that category as well, just around like negotiating our work roles and what's suitable for us to be doing as provisional psychologists on placement, say, or this is very psychology related talk in these episodes. So I apologize to anyone who's a therapist, a social work, mental health background, where they're going, oh, this is not so much for me. But yeah, I guess it's very common for psychologists because we have this placement program that we have to go through now that the 4+1's been phased out. We've got a lot of prov psychs who are going through these programs and who are needing to find placements, and a lot of them are in non-government, private practice or non-NGO settings. So yeah, sometimes you might find yourself being asked to only do intake, for example, if you're on a placement as a prov psych, and that would be something to be cautious of too.
Yeah, making sure that the placement actually allows you to meet the internship requirements, which we covered in more detail a couple of episodes back.
Yeah.
These placement red flags. But
Yeah.
I also think that's relevant for registered psychologists or any kind of contractor, regardless of your training and your background, whether you're a social worker or a psychologist, but is what your expectations are, particularly in private practice settings, because sometimes people might go into a contract role, but then they're asked to undertake marketing, for example, or contribute social media posts and things that may not necessarily have been covered in the initial interview. And so getting those expectations really clear about what is going to be involved in this particular role and whether, A, it feels appropriate for you and whether it's going to meet your professional needs, but also whether it's sustainable as well, because ultimately it does need to be sustainable. Going into a private practice as a contractor and seeing 7 or 8 clients a day because everybody else is doing that. Some people can do that and maybe they're working 1 or 2 days a week and they're fitting everything in. Everybody's different. It's thinking about what's going to work for you. So being really clear when you go into any kind of employment arrangement about, and maybe coming in with some questions around what is it that I actually want from this work and what am I?
Yes, and so I'm thinking of examples such as being asked to like man the phone on reception and things like that. And yeah, I've heard lots of stories of all sorts of requests being made of provisional psychologists on placement. And I've had a few out of the box experiences myself. And we've got to talk to someone if we're not sure about what we're being asked to do and find out whether or not it is fitting and meeting your developmental needs or not. And also work out for yourself, like, where do your boundaries lie? What are you comfortable with? Just like what you said, Chloe, what are you comfortable with? And where do you need to draw the line? You're right. So we've discussed workplace potential issues, and I just made a suggestion there. Think about where your boundaries are, what's your non-negotiable, and definitely seek advice if you're not sure. Will we move on now to getting some advice around being allowed to continue working with clients if they want to follow you after you've finished working at a practice?
Yeah, that's such a tricky one because, of course, most practice owners who have gone to the trouble of developing referral networks, and usually that requires a lot of effort, they're very keen for clients to stay within the practice and the organisation. But I do believe that clients can actually see who they choose to see. I think the difference here is that the arrangement is usually that you do not solicit referrals directly from the organisation. And so saying to a client, I'm going to be leaving this practice and I'm going here and you're welcome to follow me, may go against the contract that you've signed. Yet saying, look, I'm leaving, I'm probably going to be moving into my own practice, I haven't established the arrangements yet, and leaving it fairly open, and then the client ringing up in a couple of months' time and saying, oh, I saw you here, I've looked you up. That continuity of care can be really important. So I think it's the way that it's done. But a lot of organisations are very keen to, of course, not have their clients follow and leave the practice because they're keen to keep the client base being seen by the practitioners that they are currently employing or contracting.
And also, as well, I think it's common for us to be asked to sign contracts to say that we won't set up a practice within a certain radius as well. I've seen that happen.
Yes, I've seen that happen a number of times, and I'm not sure how much weight legally these hold, and I imagine it probably relates to each situation individually. For example, if you're in a geographical area where there's a wide number of clients and you live there, that's where you're likely to see people.
So I think it would be unfair if you worked in, say, Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, CBD, and you were finishing up and you were going to go and work somewhere else. And if they set and gave you a clause to not work within 5 kilometres or 10 kilometres, that would be unfair because it's such a populated area. Whereas maybe if you weren't particularly interested in setting up in that area once you left, you might be comfortable to sign a contract that says not within 5Ks or 10Ks because you live somewhere else and you're going to go set up somewhere else anyway. So it will be each individual situation, but I think the point we wanted to share was as well, please seek legal advice. If you're signing a contract that may have an impact on your current employment situation or the conditions during employment and then after employment.
Yes, because I do believe that it would not be appropriate to prevent somebody from working.
Now, we were going to also just touch on sometimes there can be an employment situation that is so problematic. Let's say, for example, you're experiencing discrimination or workplace bullying or unfair conditions or treatment of whatever kind. We wanted to let everyone know about how they can access support from Fair Work and that there are some things we want to share with everyone so that they know what evidence and things that they need. I think you mentioned that a person needs evidence of 3 incidents and then documented evidence and then possibly some witnesses as well to support a case.
Yes. I believe so. I think as much evidence as you can get, and we talked about this again in our previous episode, is around if you're not sure about something or something feels off, just beginning to collect the paper trail so that if you do want to seek advice or support, that you really have got something to back you up. And for someone to have a look and say, oh, yes, this really does seem like it may be discrimination or there's not enough evidence here for this. The other thing I will say is that if you're not sure around ethical or legal issues in relation to the workplace, there are advisory services run through the APS, I believe, and the AAPI, where you can call and speak to somebody and get some guidance. And if you think it may be a legal issue, then you can also usually get information from your insurance company if you feel like that might impact on your insurance in some way, or that there may be some complaint that you may be nervous about or wanting to just get a sense of preparing for, then seeking advice from the insurance company about what needs to be in place can also be a good starting point. And of course, you can also seek legal advice. That usually tends to be expensive.
That's really good advice about going to the APS or the AAPI if you are a member of those organisations. And of course, talk to your peers, talk to your co-workers and reach out for support. The last sort of area we were thinking of highlighting is just around self-care. And I know we've touched on this a few times in a few episodes, but just if we're not experiencing a positive, satisfying workplace where our development needs are being met and we feel like we're being respected, and treated fairly, that will start to affect our mental well-being. Yeah, just want to let everyone know that's important. It's important to stay on top of these things and to try not to like ignore it, because eventually it will start having an effect.
Yeah, it's so true. And if you are experiencing something, reaching out to people and talking to people, although it can feel daunting, can also be really helpful, because you might be surprised, unfortunately, at how common some of these issues are and the difficulties that people do have to experience. And I think we're not alone in this. And so I think reaching out for support and getting a sense of whether other people have been through this before as well, I think can just be a little bit validating, because you can feel alone, and you can also feel like you doubt your own. You can
Did I cause this? Am I to blame? Am I going crazy?
or am I being too sensitive?
Yeah.
If you find yourself asking those questions, I would listen to those. I would begin to look for evidence to counter those things. Okay, I think I'm going a bit crazy, or I'm too sensitive. And I'd be thinking about, okay, what is creating that sensitivity within you? And really begin to explore that, because sometimes we do miss things, and we do misinterpret things. But if we're able to have those difficult conversations, and we talked in our previous episode about how to go about those conversations, then often that can clear that up. And so it really is, sometimes we just need to say, am I making too much of this? Or when I said this, or what are you thinking when you're talking to supervisors or peers? And just getting a second opinion about those things, because I hear things like, you need to work on time management, or you're too sensitive, or other people are doing these things, and they can really minimize your experience.
Yeah.
So if you are hearing things like that, listen, really listen, and get support.
Yeah, it's normal. You're okay. You're probably not going crazy. You're allowed to feel stressed out about what's going on. Can I share another little small bit of advice that I love to do? So my suggestion is use like an observer sort of part of your mind to take on board everything that you're noticing about the place that you're working at, and as a learning experience for all the things that you're not going to do one day. Okay, this is what I'm observing. This is how this person functions. This is how they arrange their business. And this is how these people might behave in the workplace. I'm noticing that this is not very effective, or it's not ethical, or it's just not great for staff morale. This is really interesting. I'm going to take this as a learning experience and do all of the opposite things when I've got the opportunity to have a bit more control or a bit more say in my next role.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah, absolutely, because we do learn from those things, and we think, okay, that was not a good experience. How can we make things different the next time?
Just helps us to also rather than getting caught up in that personal, we can sometimes get very distressed, and even like a lot of judgment as well, the labeling, people being very bad. It's okay, yes, we can do that, but how is that helpful for me? Like, I'm just going to continue to be in like a distressed fight or flight mode if I do that. Let's flip the switch a little bit and reframe it to, this is helping me to grow. I'm actually going to be a better clinician as a result of going through this. And see you later to all you haters, because I'm going this way.
Yeah, and sometimes it really is about applying these strategies that we suggest to our clients on ourselves.
Love that. Yeah.
We know this stuff because this is what we do in sessions with our clients. And so,
that's so true.
Back to ourselves. The other thing I just wanted to say as well is that sometimes we do have specific needs, and it's really important, if you do have specific needs, that those needs are met. And so if you do have a specific need, maybe to take a 15-minute break in between sessions, and you have a way in which you can work that through, thinking about what it is that's going to help your work become more sustainable, and finding ways to advocate for that, but also saying, well, what are the workarounds? What do I actually need? Maybe you need to be in a quiet space to be writing case notes. and letting people know that, is it okay if you have maybe a counselling room for additional time to be writing those notes, because that's going to be what's helpful for you. I'm just trying to think of some examples whereby people sometimes do have, particularly if there are sensory difficulties or challenges and things can feel a bit too much, we do want to look after our nervous system. And so being able to advocate for your needs and being able to ask for those, whatever they might be, I think is really important. So I'd really encourage you, when you're going into a workplace, whether you're a provisional psych or a registered psych, to think about, okay, how can my needs be supported here? And how can I ask for that in a way where the person can hear me and allow me to have that?
That is the ultimate piece of gold, I have to say, Claire. Thank you so much for saying that. That's such a great piece of advice. And I think I could even maybe apply that in my situation a little bit.
I think we probably all could if we really thought about it. But I am thinking about people, particularly people who are maybe neurodivergent and people, who do really function better when their needs are in place and their needs have been met. And we want to be in a position where we are going to be our best selves, where we are going to function well, and being able to advocate for that is really important, because we advocate for our clients, but we want to advocate for ourselves as well.
Beautiful. We might leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I'm hoping this has been helpful for people, and we'll see you next time.
We will. Okay, bye.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps others find the show. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Between Two Psychs for more updates and resources. For more information and to explore everything we offer, head over to our website, betweentwopsychs.com.au. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.